To tip or not to tip, that is the question.
What's the difference between a canoe and an Australian? I don't know. They say nothing. They don't tip. Neither of them tip.
People are still opposed to it on a moral point of view, but all of a sudden it's starting to become a little bit more acceptable.
This is University of Melbourne PhD candidate John Frank Burgess. He's spent the past 2 years researching tipping culture, observing bar patrons across 2 continents.
I sort of started off thinking how Australia might have changed and where might the causes of those change have come from. It sort of became a comparative study of Australia and the US.
His research found people tip for a variety of reasons. These include a sense of social obligation, to mark a personal bond, to flaunt a certain financial standing, or as an excuse to strike up a conversation. The simple need to get rid of loose change is also a driver.
It depends on the service. If the level of service is pretty good, then people don't really have any problems in leaving a tip. Generally, when it comes to credit cards, that's mainly when you won't see a tip.
Mr. Burgess says the practice of tipping helps bartenders and patrons form strong and meaningful relationships.
In the US, it's because of the tipping relationship where each party becomes very concerned with the experience that the other has. All of a sudden they get to know each other.
How's it going, Mark?
Not so good.
And sometimes that can happen quite quickly. It really requires a lot of engagement and that type of emotional labour that goes into being an American bartender.
Tipping was introduced into both Australia and America around the same time in the late 19th century, but the United States' relatively unregulated labour market enabled the practice to flourish.
That allowed employers to push wages down, and that required service employees to seek more and more tips, and then that just became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and before you know it, it became quite normal in the US to tip, whereas here it remains sort of an unusual thing to do.
Which means tipping will likely increase in Australia if there's further deregulation of the labour market.
People in Australia need to decide what type of country they want to live in. And if it's one where it's guided by free market principles, that's fine. But one of the consequences of that is a shift of power towards employers, and another consequence will be tipping.
Some people tip, some people don't. Most people don't. And if they do tip, it's generally a little bit of change.
Paul Gower has worked in hospitality for several years and says even in Australia, waitstaff do already rely on tips.
We are, as hospitality, one of the basic low-wage people. Any tips on top is a real help.
The research also indicates that US drinking culture is very different as a result of tipping, with patrons less likely to get drunk.
People tend to probably mind their drinking maybe a little bit more. Also the bartender, despite what people think, having an incentive to just ply with drinks because they're paid by tips, tend not to do that because they want you to come back tomorrow, they want you to come back next week, they don't want you causing a mess in the bar and disturbing it for everyone else. So they've actually got this sort of inbuilt incentive to stop you from drinking a little bit too much.